Today we're going to take apart the Huawei Mate 8. It is very similar to the Honor 5X. In this video I'll show you how to replace the screen, the battery, the charging port, all the different components. It's pretty simple. Turn off the phone. At the bottom of the phone there's two screws. They are T2 screws. I will link all of the tools and replacement parts in the video description of this video. And remove the SIM card tray. Now the phone pops out from the back metal housing. I'm just using a thin metal pry tool to slide between the frame of the screen and the frame of the phone. I find it's easier to start on the sides of the phone first and then release the bottom of the phone after that. Now don't pull the screen away from the back housing yet. My phone did come on during the process, so I'm going to turn that off really quick again before I start messing with connections. The back fingerprint scanner is still attached to the phone, so I'm going to unclip that like a little Lego with my plastic pry tool, and then here we can see the back of the phone. The fingerprint scanner can be pushed through and replaced, as well as the camera lens that can also be pushed through and replaced. I will try to link replacement parts. Camera lenses are usually pretty hard to find. My power button was bent, you can see that here. I'm just correcting the metal frame a little bit with my pliers. If you have rubber tip pliers, it makes it a little bit easier when you're correcting bent phones. Now there is a protective flap over the ribbon cable connections. I'm going to remove this tamper evidence sticker. It just falls apart when you touch it. That's how Huawei knows if you've been inside the device or not. Now that that metal protector is off, I can unclip the screen ribbon cable, and then here is the battery connection. You might want to start with this one so it's a little bit safer. And then here's the flex extension for the bottom charging port. Gonna pop that off on the top. There's an arrow that tells you what direction goes up towards the top of the phone. There's a screw down here at the bottom with another little metal flap that protects the connection. Gonna remove that, set that off to the side, and then the extension ribbon cable can just come away from the phone. Now there is a secret trick to removing the battery. Try not to bend the battery at all during this process because it could ruin the battery and be pretty bad for your phone. Up here at the top there is a magical pull tab. Do not let this pull tab break when you're pulling on it. Mine snapped halfway through, but I was able to grab the little niblet that was left and finish pulling out the rest of the adhesive with that. When the adhesive is stretched, it loses its adhesiveness and lets you pull out the battery easier. Unfortunately, there is non-magical adhesive at the bottom of the battery, so you have to use a combination of heat and a plastic pry tool to remove that. Remember, no bending the battery, and definitely do not puncture it. I will try to link replacement batteries down in the video description below as soon as they come available. There are 4 screws down here at the charging port and the loudspeaker. Also going to remove this wire cable. And then there's 2 clips holding in the charging port. There's a little rubber boot down here at the bottom, and then the charging port itself. Loudspeaker can also just pull away from the frame of the screen. Make sure you keep all your screws organized. Some of them are different sizes. Now there are 9 screws up here for the motherboard. I'm going to unsnap this connector for the power buttons as well as the top of this wire cable. I'm going to unclip that from the board. One more protective plate over the camera connector. And then the motherboard is held in by some clasps around the edges. So pop that out. Is this frosting? One of the employees at the factory must have dropped their donut on the motherboard before installing it. I'll just spread this glaze back on top. Good as new. And this concludes another episode of Baking with Zach. Tune in next time as we pet fluffy puppies and ride little ponies. The unedible frosting, more commonly known as thermal paste, helps dissipate the heat from the processor into the aluminum exterior of the phone. It is pretty important. The front-facing camera and rear camera both unclip from the motherboard with the same Lego type connectors that we've been dealing with. The headphone jack does not come away from the motherboard. It's soldered in place. So here is the screen of the phone. The screens are actually really inexpensive for this smartphone. Huawei does a great job of keeping their replacement parts cheap. In order to replace the screen, you do need to remove it from the metal frame of the phone. You're going to reuse the frame. Unless Huawei starts selling their replacement screens with the frame, which they haven't done in the past. To remove the LCD and glass from the frame, just heat it up with a heat gun and pry it out. The metal frame most likely will not be damaged during this process. It's pretty resilient, but the LCD and glass will be damaged. It's pretty non-salvageable once you start prying it away from the back panel. The more heat you use, the easier it is to remove. It softens the adhesive. Your replacement screen will come with a ribbon cable that you'll just feed through the frame like this, and it'll look the exact same when you plug it back into the motherboard. When you install your motherboard, make sure the frosting side is down. There are a series of clips around the outside that'll keep it in place. This camera does have OIS, image stabilizing. You can see that here. Get those 9 screws back into place, along with the little protective metal flap over the camera connection. Getting the power button ribbon plugged back in, same thing with this signal wire cable. I'm going to clip that down into place. Down here at the bottom of the phone, we have the loudspeaker. and the charging port board. Pushing that into place, you'll feel it snap in as those plastic connections around the sides clip it in place. Getting the wire cable plugged in, as well as the ribbon cable for the loudspeaker. Get those 4 screws back into place. Then we're going to set the battery down. Plugging in the ribbon cable, plugging in the extension cable for the charging port. Make sure that metal plate's down there at the bottom as well. And then lastly, plug in the battery. Putting the metal plate over the top, getting that screw back into place. And I'm going to see and make sure that the phone is working. If there are lines in your screen, it might be a bad connection. So check that ribbon cable again. And if that's still not working, it might be a defective screen. So double check that. Remember, I'll have all the replacement parts linked in the video description. I'm going to plug in the fingerprint scanner to the motherboard and then set the front back into the back panel. I start at the top first, make sure that's seated, and then press down on both sides. Turn the phone on one more time, and we are good to go. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments. I post behind the scenes stuff on Twitter and Instagram. I did do a durability test on this phone. Go ahead and click that card if you're interested in watching how this phone holds up against the rest of the smartphones these days. Get those 2 screws back in at the bottom, and you are set. Thanks a ton for watching. Hope to see you around.